Is she retired now?
No, I'm waiting to see what these guys have to say.
You're not on the courtesy Senate listserv, are you? Because we have our Senate meeting set up for this year. I was like, I wonder if he's going to come or not. Now that
Yeah.
Carol's not around.
I did check just the other day for the schedule. This one is next month.
Thursday. Well, September 22nd. Yeah, this week. That's
This week.
okay.
That's all right. I'll be there if I
She's just a
possibly can.
volunteer. I couldn't do
Yeah,
that.
I'm just volunteering.
But I was wondering,
It's what I do.
Because
Yeah, you're right.
we got a table ready for you, but if you can't come, you can't.
I expect that I will.
But you know it's on the Senate website, the calendar.
Yeah, that's where I looked. I just
Okay.
Googled it up on
Yeah.
the internal
Good.
Google.
I was wondering. So I appreciate it, but if you can't, you can't. So.
No, I think I can.
But you're like waiting to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, it's working. So I can talk. Otherwise, I will move in the record.
I know, I'm sorry. I didn't want to say, I'll let you get it going. So.
All right, yeah, I'll be there.
No problem if you can't.
Yeah, well, I
We appreciate
intend to
it.
be
People
there.
look forward to getting it. So.
Yeah, but I'm going to work on institutionalizing this process before I leave or shortly thereafter,
Yes.
because I am still a community member. So,
You talked to ACCC?
I talked to Bob Bernstein,
Yeah.
and we kind of went over his head, but this was almost a year ago.
Yeah.
I might go back and have another little talk with him and see if something has
I don't
changed.
know how expensive this stuff is.
Not really, nothing, just basically a webcam and a laptop and an internet connection. They can give you that, but you have to arrange it. And they have to type in the IP address, which I don't like because my brain doesn't work that way.
Right.
But really, it's very simple in its basic form.
Well, I appreciate anything you can do, but
Yeah.
people do appreciate it.
And I'm setting a permanent setup for the Humanities Institute and for the Urban Transportation Center. So those will be archetypes of what anyone could do.
How we can use it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats so we may begin.
Anywhere you like, Heather. No matter where you sit, you're going to stand out. That's me.
That's Mr. Green.
I just,
I'm going to go to the...
this is like the Vietnam peace negotiation. The only crowd that would know all about that stuff. You guys are too young to say what. Yeah, you guys don't know crap about that. Hey, listen. I remember my son taught his friend for 11 years.
Good morning. I am Merrill Gassman, President of UIC United, the UIC chapter of the State Universities Annuitants Association, SUAA. And on behalf of our organization and APAC, the UIC Academic Professional Advisory Committee, I welcome you to our annual Fall Forum on Public Policy Issues in Illinois. We are the state's third largest SUAA chapter with over 1,600 members, and we share our parent organization's commitment to participation in civic activities that further the enlightenment and welfare of our members, who include actively employed as well as retired members of the state university's retirement system and their survivors. During the past several years, our chapter has sponsored these panel discussions whose themes have been drawn from contemporary issues important to the citizens of Illinois. In 2008, we hosted a debate on whether the state should hold a constitutional convention. Other timely topics have included political corruption and the pension funding crisis in the state. Today's discussion will focus on rescuing Illinois from the fiscal chasm into which it has fallen. I would like to acknowledge the role that our board member, SUAA past president, and UIC Emeritus Professor Dick Johnson has played in organizing today's program, as well as those in past years. Dick will introduce our distinguished panel. Our program is being broadcast live on the internet via the Ustream.tv website, thanks to UIC United member Jim Limber. The video will be archived for viewing at that site afterwards. Details for accessing it are posted on the UIC United website, or feel free to contact me. Thank you for coming, and I hope that you find this event thought-provoking and useful. And before we get started, a concession to technology in our lives, please silence your cell phones, and may I ask the panelists to speak closely and directly into the microphone so that everyone both here and on the internet can hear your remarks. Thank you. Dick?
Thank you, Merrill. Merrill has covered most of what I want to say, but I only have 2 minutes anyway. So, the forum history, this is the 6th forum that we've had over the years, and we've always had great programs, I think. We haven't always had great attendance, although that trend has been broken here today. We're very happy that so many of you have come out. We all know why we're here. The state is in a mess, to put it politely, and somehow we have to figure out a way of getting out of this. Ironically, that's where the series of forums started, because the first topic was fixing the mess, and 6 years later, I guess we weren't very effective because we still have fiscal problems. The format is that each participant will have up to 15 minutes for their opening statements. Following these statements, each participant will have 5 minutes to respond to the other panels. The floor will then be open for questions from the floor. And I hope you all have received a white card. No? See it. We'll get white cards out there. A white card like this for you to write your questions on. And when you do that, we'd also ask you to identify yourself on the card. Well, there's Irving Miller, our past president, who is passing out cards as we speak. These cards will be delivered to our moderator, Paul Green, who will then pick and choose the ones he wants to see addressed. Following this program, there will be an informal gathering with light refreshments and some informal chat. I'd like to now introduce the panel. To the far right at the table is Senator Heather Staines, Democrat from the
I feel you in your district.
for the Senate District number 7 in Chicago. I was going to make some sort of statement, answer to some of your questions about, we thought it was going to be Cullerton. And I say, this is Cullerton, dressed up like Heather Stain. But Senator Cullerton found about midday yesterday that there was something, commitment that he had to attend to, and that they already had everything lined up, and Heather Stain is the designated hitter today. But I'm sure will be able to give a very interesting and thorough kind of discussion. She's got to be good because she uses PowerPoint. Now we can hope that the PowerPoint works. To her, at the second from the left-hand side of the table is Senator Matt Murphy, a Republican from the 27th Senate District. Now, I don't know whether the redistricting has changed any of this, but store number?
Not yet.
No numbers for us anyway.
Okay, anyway, we're going with what we have, and we have to remember that there's two important legislative sessions coming up. The veto session this fall and the regular session next year, 2012, before the election. At the far end of the table, the other end, is Ralph Martirio, the Executive Director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability. You will see through his PowerPoint, he is very much, his arguments are very much data-driven, and we have to pay attention to what he says.
Some of it.
We've had... What?
Go ahead, you're doing a good job. Keep it going. You're going. You're on a roll.
And we've had 6 of these sessions, these forums, and Ralph has agreed to perform at 4 of the 6. So you know he has to be good. Finally, our moderator, a man who needs no such introduction, Professor Paul Green, head of the, where are you, chair?
What's the day?
Head chair of the Political Science Department at Roosevelt University, also the director of the Institute for Politics, a star on WGN radio and TV on election time. And if you want to hear him in action, get up early tomorrow morning, and he comes on WGN at 7:09, where he gives his first couple minutes until he's interrupted by news, sports, and weather. But it's a must hear from my point of view. So that's what it is. Excuse me. Make sure you fill out questions. I've asked Paul to handle the questions as he does at the City Club in Chicago. I told him to handle it in his inimitable fashion. Okay, let's get the show on the road.
Very good. Well, good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be back on this campus. I started my teaching career many decades ago, several blocks east of here. UIC is following Horace Greeley. They keep going west, and so this is uncharted territory for me, but Morgan Street used to be the end, but it's good to be here, nice crowd. Well, you'd think there was some money at stake or something when all of you are here. Anyway, let's get going. We're going to have 15 minutes from each of the panelists, or less. I don't think the or less will come into play. So we'll start off with, I was going to say Senate President, but that's obviously a premature TBA. State Senator Heather Steens from Chicago, and she'll have 15 minutes to make her presentation. How about a round of applause to begin? Are we blocking? Yeah.
We may need
No, you're gonna be okay. You're really not. Your head doesn't get in the way.
Okay.
to get the computer deck on screen.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and start while they're working on that.
This the gentleman.
You mean there's a technical glitch at a university? I'm shocked.
This is mine, because I can start while they're working on that. Listen, I'm not gonna, is this on? I don't get to, why isn't this working?
Okay, is this working now? There we go. We're hitting it. So I don't need to get to the slides for a couple minutes. So while they're working that out, I'll just start in. You know, I was meeting with my estate lawyer this morning talking about death and taxes. So I'm very happy to come here and talk about Illinois' fiscal health, which I'm sure is really going to cheer us all up. And while I just want to say a couple things. One, I know a lot of folks from SUAA live in my district, and I hear from you regularly. You guys are very informed and engaged. I thank you for that. It's very nice to be here. I know I'm not I'm almost actually as tall as the Senate President, but I don't nearly equal his stature. I apologize that he can't be here today, but I'm really thrilled to be here myself. And the good news is he did share with me a lot of his information, so I'm cribbing from him mercilessly. It took us a very long time, years of borrowing and doing a lot of fiscal gimmicks for us to sort of get into the hole that we got into as a state. And, you know, this is, if we go back just a year ago, we were facing about a $13 billion, you know, at least, deficit, over $8 billion in unpaid bills. Now, we have taken a number of steps to start addressing that fiscal situation. We have still more to do, but I do want to at least talk about some of the things we've been doing to date, and then we'll get into what I think we're going to still need to do going forward. It was not with any sense of real pleasure that the General Assembly voted to raise taxes in January of this year. You know, we were compelled to do so because the fiscal health had been so ignored for so long, and felt that in order to restore any credibility as a state, that was a step we needed to take. Some have been considering Illinois to be the state itself, to be the biggest drag on our economy. We were deadbeat with unpaid bills at the $8 billion. We weren't paying our bills. We're very much known to be a deadbeat state. Wall Street, you may recall, have been lowering our bond ratings regularly, and we're threatening to get us junk bond status. And, you know, while it's not fun to raise taxes, this is something we felt that we had to do to try to restore some sense of fiscal stability. The details on what we did on the tax increase. The flat personal rate goes from 3% to 5%. That's what we've done. If you're a Democrat, like myself, we consider that a 2% raise in the income tax. Like the Republicans, Matt Murphy may have heard us say this, they consider that a 67% increase. So, you know, your perspective does matter in all of this. For corporations, our flat tax rate goes from 4.8% to 7%. That's how much we've raised that. Now, there are people who are skeptical whether these tax increases will in fact be temporary. But you should know that, in fact, it is temporary. Unless we take a vote to change something, they go away in 4 years. And that is the current situation. A little bit of history on that. When Governor Thompson, when he was governor, he approved a temporary tax increase in 1983. 18 months later, it was rolled back. So it did, in fact, stay temporary. Later on in 1990, when Republican Governor Jim Edgar, he ran on telling voters that he needed to make Thompson's second temporary tax increase permanent. Neil Hartigan ran against it, saying he'd repeal it. In fact, Edgar won, and that temporary tax increase remained permanent. So So we have a history where once it didn't, once it did. At this point though, it will take a vote for it not to roll back. So they will go away, phasing out over beginning in 4 years. Now, what I want to say about the tax increase is that even the Illinois Business Journal has said that this was probably inevitable. I don't think there's any way we could solve a $13 billion deficit without raising some revenues. There's more we need to done on the cut side. We've done that as well, which I'll get to in a minute. But as one of their operating officers, the chief operating officer for the Illinois Business Journal said, if you were thinking that the state could balance its budget by cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, you were floating in la-la land. He goes on to say that I'm not saying that there's nothing that can be cut, but what can actually be cut is chump change compared to the obligations, and the state can't walk away from its pension debts and overdue bills. So that's what we've been trying to do, is sort of bring back some credibility here. Now, we haven't solved all of our problems. I do think we're seeing signs of recovery, and at least we are stabilizing. After our tax increase, you may have noted that some other states have been trying to steal away and suggest that they're a better place for businesses. My leader, who's not here today, is fond of saying we thank Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin for making Illinois almost look normal again. And their taxes up there, even after our tax increase, are still higher than ours. In Wisconsin, our tax rate is 5%, but theirs tops out at 7.75%, while our corporate tax rate is 7%, Wisconsin's is almost 8%. So even after our tax increase, they have higher taxes. We've also been having companies moving from Wisconsin to Illinois. You've got Governor Christie, New Jersey, who has the highest tax rate in the nation, and he's been here trying to steal away jobs as well, spending money on our media market. What they did in New Jersey was skip pension payments, which I would tell you is what got us into the problem in the first place here in Illinois. So he's skipping pension payments and withholding $1 billion from local governments in what they're supposed to be otherwise getting. I don't think that's the way to go about solving problems. You have Indiana, Mitch Daniels, who's considered a miracle worker there, but their tax rates, if you look at them, aren't very different than ours in Illinois. Their local income taxes in some counties have their rates over ours here. We've got companies like Navistar who are moving from Indiana here to Illinois. And when you have folks like the president of China coming into town, but they're not going to Kokomo or Camden in New Jersey or Indianapolis in Indiana, they come here to Chicago. It truly still remains, I think, a vibrant economy, and we're hearing every day about new businesses moving here, and I think that will continue to be the case. Now, here's where I'd like to try to talk about a couple of charts on our state historical spending, and it looks like the timing is pretty good. Are we about to get up and running? Well done, thank you.
All right. Are you sure?
I don't think we should.
Okay, go right
It
ahead.
looks like you are.
Carry on. You got Mark, carry it. Okay.
And Ralph, how do I just move the slide?
Come on, Ralph.
Just
No, I don't think I just press this.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. So I want to just give you a little bit of grounding in where our revenues come from in the state and how we spend those dollars. So as this slide is showing you, over half of our money is coming from the income tax, okay? Now, one thing you should know is we're one of about, I think it's 3 states, something along those lines, that doesn't tax retirement income, for example. So you guys aren't taxed on that. Nobody is. No matter how wealthy a retiree is, none of their retirement income is getting taxed. Now, Senator Cullerton got himself in a little bit of trouble when he talked about that. There's no plan to do that. No worries. Just hypothetically, if we were, you could raise, $1.6 billion more. That's certainly something that can get looked at. You look at sales taxes. Our sales tax revenues are about 20% of our revenues. And in Illinois, I want to at least mention too, we have a very narrow sales tax base. I won't be surprised if Ralph gets into this in some more detail. This is something that I know he's studied for a long time. We tax mostly just goods, hard things like furniture that hard goods. We don't tax many services, things like haircuts or dog grooming, things like that. Most states around us tax many more services than we do in Illinois. So that's certainly something else that we could be, as an option, looking at, maybe even being able to lower our sales tax rate by broadening the tax base of what's getting, the sales tax is applying to, as another potential option. That could also make our tax structure less regressive. It's a highly regressive tax structure that we have in the state of Illinois. Poorer people pay a lot more here than they do in the rest of the country, whereas higher income folks in Illinois pay a lot lower portion of their income in taxes than the rest of the country. So doing some of those things might be able to help level the playing field. Federal receipts are used to pay for, a lot of things like Medicaid and other things. Those accounted for about $14 billion this year, is what we're projecting, and that has come down significantly from last year because of the stimulus dollars of the federal government going away or phasing out. And then there's some other taxes and fees, like public utility tax and things like that, totaling about $34 billion into our general revenue fund projected. Now I want to look at our operating expenditures, how we're spending the dollars. This is how the governor had proposed spending it in the budget. We didn't do it quite exactly this way, but close. So it gives you a good feel for how the dollars get spread. The largest piece of it, 26%, gets spent on education. So that goes out directly to schools. A little bit stays here in the state to run the Illinois State Board of Education, but almost all of it's going out directly to fund schools, including preschool, elementary school, high schools, all the way through our college and university systems, which are some of the best in the country, as you guys know. Medicaid and health care is another big chunk of it, 21%, and that's going out directly to pay for the health care people who are at the poor end of the spectrum are receiving. The other big chunk of it then is, the next one is human services. And again, most of that's not paying state employees whatsoever. It's going out almost directly to a large number of grants to nonprofit organizations, Lutheran Family Services, Catholic Charities, all sorts of nonprofits that are providing many human services, homeless shelters, taking care of our mental health, post-mental illnesses, or developmental disabilities. That's all for the Human Services Department. And then we have some other things here. If you actually, statutory transfers out at the top, those are large part of that is going to counties and local government, other local governmental units. And then what's really going to fund governmental services are public safety, regulation, and government services is a much smaller chunk of this. And in fact, we have a very low number of employees, and that has been dropping dramatically. There's national groups that take a look at the number of employees on a per capita basis from all the states. Illinois ranks 49th or 50th out of that at this point. And in fact, over the last few years, we have dropped our number of employees by 14,000 employees over the last 10 years. We are not a high number of employee state, even though sometimes we think we can just cut out fat, waste. That's going to be hard to do at this point. We're already very low in terms of our number of state employees. And you've got pensions here too, and debt service, which is really making a lot of the payments for the past pension borrowing we've done, which is the last chunk of our spending here. And that is going to continue to grow as it stands right now. So that's one of the areas that we're going to continue to have pressure on in the state budget. I want to move on just quickly to talk about, you may have noticed in here that that when you look at the pensions, I wanted to show you how the dollars there get spent, how it gets divided between the various pension systems. A very small part of that goes to the General Assembly and the judges. But the next piece is where the state SERS is the State Employees Retirement System. You guys know SERS, and then with the state, and then SERS is the state, state university professors, right? And then TRS, which is by far the largest chunk, goes for teachers who are not even state employees. They're, employees of all the different school districts out there. But we're paying
except Chicago.
Except Chicago, which we are not paying for Chicago. Tiny little fraction do we pay for Chicago on the teachers' pensions, but we do for the rest of the state. Paul is exactly correct on that. Now, one thing I want you to do, I'm just highlighting on these next two. When you see what Governor Quinn was projecting for revenues, $33.4 billion. And the spending he projected, that he proposed, was $36 billion, out of whack. We couldn't do that. We did feel like we needed to stop how we were managing that regard. So what we did instead was go back and cut the operating expenditures from what the governor had proposed. And you're hearing about that. We've, in fact, when you look at how our current fiscal year budget is compared to last year's fiscal year budget, we are down, if you exclude pension payments, because previous 2 years we borrowed to make our pension payments. This year we are fully funding them. We're paying them out of GRM. If you exclude that, we're down in spending over $2 billion. So we've been cutting $2 billion sort of out of the operating expenditures of the state. And we're feeling that across the board. It's come out of general state aid to schools, Medicaid, prison systems, agriculture. It really has been in lots of areas that we've been doing that. I think we're going to continue to have pressure because of our pensions and other things. You know, we still continue to have a structural situation where our revenues don't grow as fast as our expenditures. Ongoing pressures. I think there are some things we can be doing about that. With pensions, for example, as Paul Green was talking about, we pay, the state pays very little for the teachers in Chicago's pension funds. We could, in fact, change that for the TRS so that they can pay more into their pension systems from their local governments, not the state. There's a lot of logic to this as well, given that the state, the local entities are making the decisions around their salary and pension benefits. We don't, yet we pick up the tab for it, so that's led to some strange incentives. So I think there's more we could be looking at there. There's also some things, and I know I think the Republicans have talked about this as well, that we could be looking at retiree health care without getting into constitutional issues, which you can sort of get into if you look at other pension contribution payments. But with the retiree health care, we've had this situation where people, very well-off retirees, high-level retirees, leave, go to second jobs, yet they're still getting their health care coverage by the state. We could take a look at that and reduce things. So I'm going to close on that note. I'm getting the time noted here. I want to say the last thing that we're doing, and this will be the last item I talk about, in addition to some of those things we're projecting, we're really fundamentally changing the way we do our budgeting, moving to what's called budgeting for results, which is taking a look at collecting and really using performance data on what it is we're trying to achieve, how well we're achieving that, to really drive the way we allocate our dollars so that we can really make it more driven based on impact and the value. Which is what you guys have all been doing in your households for years, and what we at the state should be doing. So there's a lot of change underfoot, a lot already made, a lot underfoot. We've reduced the deficit from the $13 billion we were a year ago to now 0. We are operating under our revenue currently this year for general revenue fund. Our unpaid bills are down from the $8 billion they were a year ago to about $4 billion right now. We still have a long way to go. That's not acceptable level. That will continue to move down. So there's still work to do. We're making progress. And I'm looking forward to hearing from our other panelists.
Very good. Round of applause. Chances are Senator Murphy just going to say IBID, right? You agree with all that. There's no reason for you to stand up and even chat.
That's right.
He doesn't have a weapon, does he? No. Okay. Senator Murphy from the.
No, I won't.
Yeah. Well, normally people complain when they can't hear me. From the Duchy of Palatine, up in the northwest suburbs, Senator, go at it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Round of applause. Let's go. It may not be there at the end.
Yeah, that's right. Let's get the applause in now. Thank you, Paul and Dick Johnson. Thanks very much for the invitation. It's good to be here. It's good to be out talking about these issues, and because it's serious, it's substantive, and it has a real impact on people's lives. And I want to start out with sort of a environmental point, not the environment, but the sort of Springfield environment. Heather and I agree on some things, and we disagree on others. I think some of the things we agree on are what we would like this state to look like and how we would like to see the end result of policy decisions. I think most people are in agreement on that. And I hope we're in agreement as well that we have good faith differences on the best way to get there. And that's what drives a lot of what is viewed as rancor and discord, whether it's in Washington or Springfield, is that you have people who passionately believe that their way is the better way to produce that result that we're all looking for. And when you think, in addition to that, that the other side is perhaps going in a diametrically opposed direction, and you really care about getting to that goal, it can lead to heated debate. I have a lot of respect for Heather. I've worked closely with her. I think she is a bright, intelligent, and effective senator, and frankly, a wonderful person, for whatever that's worth.
But
From me.
Get to the but.
Whatever that's worth from me.
no, it is.
That being said, I think to answer the question that we're here for, how do you get out of this? You have to start by analyzing where we are. And as we all intuitively know, but maybe all the facts aren't at the tip of our fingers, we're not in a good place and haven't been for a while. We have an all-time high debt. It took 185 years for Illinois to accumulate $8 billion in debt. We've accumulated 3 times that in the last 9. The bond and pension debt in 2003 was $54 billion, $4,300 per Illinoisan. Today it's $119 billion, roughly, if you exclude the retiree health shortfall. That's $9,300 per person, a 120% increase in 9 years. Collectively, the 5 state-administered pension funds, by the last accounting, are 38% funded. As you know, the goal is 90. We have a deficit that remains. The governor wanted to borrow about $8.75 billion back in February after the tax increase passed, and he wanted to do that to pay down the backlog of bills of approximately $7 to $8 billion. We were already at that point one of the 5 most indebted states per capita in the country. So obviously, more debt didn't strike some of us as the best path forward. We're jockeying with California for the worst credit rating in this country. CEOs recently ranked us as the 3rd worst state in the country in which to do business. We have now the highest state tax rates in our history. And I know Heather had referenced the fact, and the Senate President did when the tax increases passed, that we needed to do these things. We needed to pass this tax increase to fix our bond rating. But our bond rating hasn't been fixed by this. The bond houses continue to question the status of our spending habits and have yet to improve our bond status as a result. And again, this was sold as a tax increase to pay bills. The backlog of bills remains $7 to $8 billion. The corporate tax rate, when you combine the actual corporate tax rate and the personal property replacement tax, we have the 4th highest tax rate on corporations in the country. Spending is at an all-time high. If you look at the governor's numbers that he just recently put out, the budget passed this spring will produce a $455 million increase in our deficit. The spending number was supposed to be $33.2 billion. When you add in the accounting gimmick of incurring the costs of another $1.1 billion in Medicaid bills this year, but paying them next year, it's actually more of about $34.3 billion, which is higher than we spent last year. What do we have as a result? Unemployment of 9.9%. That's where we are. What has been tried? We tried to increase spending. You can't take the pension payment out of the spending equation. It's part of it. It's like saying that I cut my monthly budget at home by pulling my mortgage payment offline. It's part of what you owe. So you have to include it apples to apples. When you include that in, We're up about 35% above inflation over the last 9 years in spending. We're increasing borrowing, as I said. The amount in debt payments that we make every year is up 200% over 2003. That is dead space in our budget. When you're putting billions of dollars into making debt payments from past borrowing, you don't have the flexibility to put that into other priorities. And we've tried to increase taxes. Since the tax increase went into effect in January, we went from having an unemployment rate below the national average to one that is nearly a full point ahead of it. For the months of June, July, and August, Illinois lost more jobs than any state in the country. There is a better way to do this. And again, this goes back to the differing viewpoints of how you govern and the impact of policy. We need to have a strong, and there's no dispute about this, we need to have a strong jobs climate with more taxpayers to fund what we need to do at the state government level. It's not sustainable. The model we have, even with reforms, is not sustainable without a vibrant, growing economy. If you take a look at just the numbers, for every job, on average, that is created in Illinois, it adds about $4,000 to the state treasury in tax receipts. For every point you lower the unemployment rate, it's about 60,000 jobs. So if we drop that, for every point, you're talking about $250 million in tax revenues coming into the state. We were 47th in the country over the last decade in job growth. If we had been just average, we'd have had over 400,000 more jobs, generating over $1.6 billion a year more in revenue. That's how you sustain this model. That's how you fund government. So then the question becomes, how do you create more taxpayers? This spring in Springfield, the Senate Republican Caucus created two plans, so to speak, conjoining plans. The Illinois Reality Check Plan, which was a budget blueprint to balance our budget, roll back the tax increase, and pay down our backlog of bills, in addition to a jobs plan with reforms to try and make Illinois a more job-friendly environment. Some of the highlights, of course, lower taxes. I know some don't agree, and we'll probably hear this to the contrary, but on a bipartisan basis over history, tax cuts have created increased revenues to the Treasury and more jobs. When President Kennedy wanted to create the booming 60s, he came to the Chicago Economic Club in December of 1962 and said he needed to cut the tax rate to do it. He did it, and we had a boom in the 60s. Revenue to the Treasury went up, the economy took off. When Ronald Reagan was setting out to make it morning again in America, he did the same thing. We got the same result. Tax rates were reduced, revenue to the Treasury doubled throughout the decade. And even with President Bush, by the time the tax rates were fully implemented after the 2003 round, we saw revenue to the Treasury increase thereafter, before this Great Recession, by 42%. And even here in Illinois, Heather made reference to the 80s when we had the tax cut for about 4 or 5 years. During that time, GDP went up about 7.2%, about 7.85% on average. Then we raised the tax again, only 20% then, not the 67% we did this time. And it slowed over the next 5. We had 42% better growth under the lower tax rate than we did under the higher tax rate. We need to look at cutting spending. When people look at investing in Illinois and they see the debt that we have, it makes them look elsewhere. Because they have this, I think, real sense that why would I come to Illinois with all of that debt when they're going to look at me like the goose that laid the golden egg as soon as I got there and start taxing me? How can I predict what it's going to cost me to do business in Illinois when there's this huge mountain of debt out there that I know I'm going to be asked to pay some percentage of? And so unfortunately, we end up getting scratched off the list. And every time we get scratched off the list, every time Caterpillar expands in Texas instead of Illinois, or Deere expands in Iowa instead of Illinois, we lose that $4,000 per person. So we need to tackle this problem to create this economic engine that can provide us what we need. I want to be clear on something else Heather said, because what I'm laying out is a completely alternative vision of a lower tax, lower spending, less borrowing state. And that's a dramatic change from the last 8 or 9 years. I would submit to you the last 8 or 9 years have not produced results that anybody in this room are comfortable with. And given the fact that our experience in Illinois is significantly worse than around the country, blaming it on national and global trends isn't good enough. We have an opportunity to be better here than we are. If you look at everything this state has going for it, the advantages we have, and I will submit to you, and Heather brought up, some of our neighboring governors, and some of them are in my party. And when I love Mitch Daniels, but when I hear him say, living next door to Illinois is like living next door to the Simpsons, there's a certain amount of pride that gets you angry, because we're better than them. And if we actually get our policies in order, we have way more to offer than Indiana or Wisconsin, or frankly any other state in the Midwest ever could. Regional transportation hub, a workforce the U.S. Chamber of Commerce says people want to hire, a diverse population and economy, from the banking and financial hub up here in northern Illinois, the agricultural belt in central Illinois, the energy belt down in southern Illinois. No one can match what we have and who we are. And yet we lag at the bottom on just about everything. And that to me is unacceptable. And as a result, the product for you is unacceptable. And now we're talking about pensions that are in question and other priorities and promises that we're not in a position to keep. We're better than this, and we can do better than this. And I look forward to the dialogue and other questions, and we can get into some specifics about where we need to go. Thank you very much for your time.
Brad, I'm going to try to make this technology work. You should know that I actually teach technology law at Northwestern Law School, and I cannot turn on a computer and make it do what I want it to do. Just so you know. So let me try here my hardest. I have the secret password.
Here we go. Here we go.
Let's see. No.
It's all part of my plot.
You did this on purpose, Murphy. So, while I'm trying to get this done, a couple of things about economic growth. Just some facts to give you context. Because I don't think it's actually helpful to start off where we are and look at the problem unless you have the context and the long-term trends that went along with it. So let's go to the national level first, and job creation and who's benefited from the economy and tax rates. So the theory on supply-side economics is pretty simple. The theory is, if you cut taxes at the very top, that will generate benefits for the economy as a whole. It will trickle down. It will stimulate such significant economic growth that even though you're cutting tax rates at the top, everybody will do better. The economy will grow at a faster rate. The people at the top will take that cut in taxes. They will invest it in creating jobs. And so it's a win-win, and because you create so many more jobs, because your economy grows so much stronger as a result of these tax cuts, at worst, from a federal deficit standpoint, you are revenue neutral. In all probability, you are revenue gains. That is the theory. Now let's look at the reality. From 1947 until 1980, America had very high marginal tax rates on the wealthy. They varied from 72 to 90%. Very high rates. Over that period of time, and this is U.S. Census data, our economy grew on average by 3.8% per year. Gross domestic product grew by 3.8% per year after inflation in real terms. That was the average annual growth. Income distribution in America over that period of time went 66% to the bottom 90%, 34% to the top 10%. That was the basic economic structure in relation to tax policy. Then in 1981, we had the Reagan Revolution. If you could get this on while I'm chatting, that'd be great. We had the Reagan Revolution, and he cut marginal tax rates from 90% down to 38.5. Then again in 2001, George W. Bush cut those marginal tax rates again down to 35% and made additional cuts in the estate tax and the capital gains tax, which primarily benefit the most affluent Americans. That's what happened. Here's what happened to economic growth in the nation. It declined by a full percentage point, from 3.8% a year to 2.8% a year. A full point. That's billions and billions of dollars less in economic activity. It didn't trickle down. So the distribution in income growth flipped. So at the bottom, 90% of income earners in America only got 34% of all income growth. The wealthiest 10% got 66%. And deficits exploded. And in fact, revenue trend lines of the federal government never returned to the same area they were before the marginal tax rates on the wealthiest who are generating and realizing most of the income growth in America. So basically, every major premise after a 30-year period, and I want to be very clear about what I'm talking about here, I don't include the Great Recession. I stop at 2007, because I don't want to skew this by the Great Recession.
Yeah.
So every single contention made by supply-side economic advocates has turned out to be false. Doesn't work. So that's the truth, that's the reality. If you really want a scary number, from 2000 to 2007, income growth distribution in America went 94% to the top 10%, 6% to the bottom 9%. So it's not tax policy alone that generates strong economic growth. Cutting taxes doesn't seem to work. Another thing about a long period of time, because you focused on the last 9 years, which is fair. The last 9 years in Illinois have been, when we think about it, bad. In fact, I like it that Mitch Daniels called us the Simpsons. Frankly, I didn't know Illinois state government was quite that functional. I put him up there with the Simpsons, so that's really helpful. But I will say this. From 1990 to 2002, so covering Republican administration, Illinois was lower taxed than the rest of the nation and Midwest for the most part. We have the fifth largest economy, fifth largest population. We ranked 46th in total state and local tax burden as a percentage of income. 46th. We were lower than virtually every other Midwestern state except Missouri, who was virtually tied with us. Everybody else was higher tax. Over that same period of time, our economic growth lagged, you got it, the rest of the U.S. and the rest of the Midwest. So when we were very low tax and very low spending, we were also very low economic growth. So there are some structural problems here in Illinois that are very long-term that have contributed to our problems. And I'm going to try to put some of those in context and go quickly. So here is what faced the General Assembly in January. They were looking at about a $16 billion accumulated deficit, right? They had projected revenue for the fiscal year coming in before their tax increase of just over $26 billion. Hard costs, and these are some of the things I think Senator Murphy was right to harp on. We have some horrible hard costs. Look at this one, $6 billion in unpaid bills. That's outrageous. But we also had one-time revenue used in the prior year. We had debt service to pay. We had our pension payment coming out of the ramp. We had transfers out by statute, special funds, etc. So our hard costs were $18 billion. And then to continue the prior year's general fund spending on services, aside from those hard costs, would have cost us another $24 billion. So we had $42 billion in revenue needs. We only had $26 billion in anticipated revenue. That's a $16 billion hole, unless you wanted to cut your general fund by just about half. No one's going to want to do that, because if you take out the debt payments and the pension, this is what we spend on services. 9 out of $10 of service payments goes this way. Education, healthcare, human services, public safety. 9 out of 10 bucks. So if you're just going to cover your hard costs, your debt that you've accumulated over the years and all this stuff, and you want to reduce spending with across-the-board cuts, that would be your board. There it is. Make your pick. So we got a tax increase instead, and I think that was the right thing to do. The problem is they didn't quite go far enough, and I'll give you some data on that in a second. Then there's a question about whether or not we are actually spending more. And the reality is, after you adjust for something called inflation and another something called population growth, we are spending significantly less now than at any other time in our past. So in nominal dollars, you look up the period of time. This is the period, I think, highlighted by Senator Murphy, 2000 to 2010. If you just compare dollars spent, we were spending more. In fact, almost 25% more over this period. Then you adjust for the consumer price index and population growth. Now, the consumer price index is a great inflation metric, right? It's tied to costs over the economy as a whole. If you use that and population growth, in real dollars, we were spending about 5% less. Now, CPI, while it might be a good metric for the economy as a whole, not so good for state government. Why? It includes everything. The cost of Pop-Tarts, Clorox bleach, haircuts, hair care products. State government doesn't buy a lot of Pop-Tarts, or at least in Blagojevich would go on hair care products, right? Buy those anymore.
And the striped shirt.
Yeah. What we buy now, and what we've always bought, is labor. Think about it. Not 80 to 90% of every line in the state budget is paying the salaries and the wages of the individuals providing the services, whether they be teachers or firefighters or whatever. So if you adjust for the more accurate employment cost index, we were actually spending close to 20% less on public services in 2010 than we had in 2000. So I think bringing some of these economic factors into play, understanding where we got to our problems, it wasn't high spending. I think Senator Staines pointed out that we had cut our budgeted headcount. This is through 2008. You can see the cuts in budgeted headcount at the state level, dropping from, in 1980 under, was it Governor Thompson? 1980 Governor Thompson, 72,000, down to in 2008, 55,000. It's been cut since then, about another 4,000, am I right, Heather? Roughly in that area. So budgeted headcount is down. We do rank 49th out of the 50 states in number of state workers per capita. By the way, 5th largest population, so hardly a high headcount state. And then if you want to go across the lines, I don't care what your favorite thing is. This is the general fund, and I do exclude pensions. I'm going to get into why we have that pension debt. But our actual spending on the public services has been cut, whether you use any inflation metric at all, significantly over time, okay? I just wanted to give you these numbers. I will make this whole PowerPoint available to Dick Johnson and SUAA so you could have it electronically if you want these numbers. I'm not going to dwell on any of them, but you look, K-12 has been cut, higher ed's been cut, healthcare has been cut, human services has been cut, public safety has been cut. In real inflation-adjusted terms. Every single one of them. Now, why? The long-term trends make it clear that our number one problem in Illinois is flawed tax policy. It's not high spending, it's flawed tax policy. Number two, because for decades we had flawed tax policy, decision makers were highly irresponsible in their fiscal management of the budget, and they made very irresponsible decisions that we're paying for today. Number one amongst them, can you guess? Not making the normal cost contribution to the pension system. You know, they didn't do that for decades. So much so that by 1994, under a pretty moderate Republican governor named Jim Edgar, They were looking at their unfunded liability across the 5 pension systems. It was over $20 billion. $20 billion. So here's what they did. Bipartisan, by the way. I'm not singling out a party. This was bipartisan irresponsibility. They got together and they told you, we're going to pay off this pension debt. We're going to pay it. We're going to set up a ramp. You've all heard of the pension ramp. That's going to require increased payments to the pension system so that by the magic year of 2045, we will be 90% funded. Here's why none of us should have bought it. They got to this point because they were underfunding their pensions to maintain services. Because they didn't have the tax revenue to pay for their services. You need tax revenue if you want public services. Okay? They didn't pass a funding stream to pay for this new pension ramp. They just said someday they're going to pay it. So if you don't fix the underlying structural flaw that caused you to underfund your pension for decades, you just put in a payment schedule, you going to make it? Better yet, they knew it when they passed the law. So for the first 15 years of that pension ramp, by law, the state underfunded its pensions. It didn't even make its normal cost contribution for 15 years by law. This was the responsible funding plan. Right? So by law, they increased the unfunded liability from $20 billion to $44 billion by 2008, and then the markets crashed. And we lost half the value of our assets in our pension system. We went from $44 billion unfunded to $80 overnight like that. So when you see this big ramp up in spending from 2000 to 2010, it's this goofy pension ramp that is the result of flawed tax policy. Never having the capacity to actually pay for those 4 core services of education, healthcare, public safety, and human services. That has been the problem. Now, our numbers, where we analyze this, by the way, you should know I didn't get into the organization. We're a bipartisan group. My board of directors includes everybody from David Wilhelm, the former chair of the Democratic National Committee, and a couple of the public employee unions, to Bill O'Connor, former Republican state rep, who was the chief of staff for Tom Cross for a while, and Stephen Schnorr, the former director of the Bureau of the Budget under Edgar and Ryan. So my board literally mistrusts and dislikes each other. But that's a good thing because it focuses us to be data-based. And all our work goes out for peer review by independent PhD economists in both academia and the GAO.
Disregard that, one of those,
In fact, our report, where we identified that it was primarily flawed tax policy, it's called Funding Our Future. It's only 66 pages. You will love every compelling word in it. Was also peer-reviewed by a PhD economist named Matt Sawicki, who happens to be the head of state and local tax at the Government Accounting Office in D.C. So if your tax policy doesn't work, I understand. I'll get going. But if your tax policy doesn't work, you have this. It's a structural deficit. It means that every year, your revenue growth won't keep up with the cost of funding your service levels if you just adjust for inflation and population. That means every year got a little deficit, and every year what they had done for 30 or 40 years was paper it over by underfunding their pensions, primarily deferring money that they owed from this year into next year. These were the primary fiscal irresponsible practices that they did for decades to paper over poor tax policy. So anyway, these are all the looking at the cuts to different departments. They're ugly. By the way, this is the differential in our per kid expenditure today at the state level, the foundation level, and how it's grown over time between the cost of an adequate public education in an efficiently operated school district and what we give the schools. Okay? It's grown from a differential of $100 to almost $2,000. We want to cut education a little bit more, right? Because that would be a good thing for us. Part of the cost of having a state tax system that doesn't work is the pushing of costs from the state to the local level. So while Illinois is, and by the way, it remains a low tax state overall, We're a high property tax state. This shows you the growth in property tax revenue, once again, after inflation versus the growth in median income in Illinois after inflation. And you can see from 1990 to 07, right, we didn't include the Great Recession because that mucks up everything. Property taxes grew by 53 points in real terms. Median income was up 4.9%. So you have property taxes growing at over 10 times the rate of growth in income for most people. That's not sustainable. If you look at it from 2000 to 07, property taxes up 23 points, median income down 5 points. So that's a very tough way to tax folks. This is that pension ramp I told you about. So this was the responsible funding plan passed into law. That's the year-to-year increase under existing law. This is still law in the pension ramp to get us to 90% funded by 2045. And by the way, I don't think the ramp has been adjusted since the markets crashed. So this is the best case scenario pension ramp. This is why we're overall spending more. We're paying for past sins. Look at those increases. This is huge. I think I'm pretty good at tax policy. I can't design a tax system to pay that. So we passed a tax increase, and here's where we stood, and here's how we compare. So Senator Murphy, you did point out that Illinois' corporate rate was 7%, and we have another 2.5% of something called the corporate personal property replacement tax that looks like an income tax. But you can't add that in as corporate income tax because 47 other states still have the personal property tax. So unless you can add in what that personal property tax does to corporate tax burden, you're comparing apples to oranges. Apples to apples, it's a state level income tax. And here's the thing, if you run a business, would you rather be taxed on the cost of your inventory and equipment or on your profits? Don't think long about that. You've made a profit already. You pay tax on it. Our new rate is 7% on the corporate level until 2015, then it jumps back down to 5.2. The governors of Indiana, Wisconsin, and New Jersey came here and said, states, your business is going to run to our states because you increased your tax rate. Really? We're now at 7. Indiana's 8.5, higher than us and has been. Wisconsin's 7.9, New Jersey is 9. It was a completely unfounded thing for them to say. Yeah, I know, we stay lower tax than everybody. Cutting spending at the state level takes money directly out of the private sector economy. Here's why. Remember I said at the beginning of this discussion that state spending is on what? It's primarily the salary and wages of the workers providing the service. What is the U.S. economy? It is consumer spending. It is 70% consumer spending. Who are state workers? They are great consumers because they are low middle income to middle income wage earners. So if you cut spending at the state level, what you're doing is taking salary away from people who then can't spend it in their local economy, so they don't. So the net impact of that is for every $4 billion you cut, you lose 56,000 jobs in Illinois in our private sector as an impact of the decreased spending. This is not my analysis. This is the analysis of Mark Zandi, a PhD economist who happens to be the head economist at Moody's.com. He is no liberal. He was the chief economist for Mr. McCain, Senator McCain, in his presidential run. Zandi's analysis. So after a recession, cutting spending at the state level will hurt our private sector economy and take action directly out of it by decreasing consumer spending. It's going to happen. So what are the options? This was the kicker.
Your closing kicker.
Yeah. We could borrow from financial institutions to pay overdue bills. This is debt restructuring. It's not new debt. So if we owe small providers, I don't know what the number even is right now. It's hard to get a hard number from the governor's office. I'm sure everyone has that frustration. But yeah, about $4 billion roughly. If we borrow $4 billion, We already owe that $4 billion, so we're restructuring the debt at a lower interest rate. We pay our providers that deliver the services under contract to the state. That'll stimulate the economy. That'll be good. We haven't increased our debt at all, but we've created hard debt where it was soft debt, and we have to responsibly pay it back. As long as there's a short payment period on it, and as long as we don't borrow to fund current operational services, which we've got to stop doing, it's an okay thing to do. And number two, one of the options that I'm sure will be considered, and in fact I sure will happen, is they're going to continue deferring some payments from one year to the next. They have, they will, it's a tough situation. Number three, I think they're going to cut services some more. I don't think either Senator Murphy or Senator Staines, when they said more hard cuts have to come, are wrong. I think that's going to happen. I just think we have to understand that we are no longer cutting fat by any means. We are cutting meat and bone out of essential services. We disproportionately cut human services that care for the most vulnerable members of our society, mental health and DD in particular, and we ought to stop doing that at some juncture. But I think those cuts will be on the table. Then I think, frankly, it's time to fix the tax system to make it work in a modern economy. Just make it work in a modern economy. Follow the principles of sound capitalist tax policy. We don't. But if we were gonna, we'd expand our sales tax base to include services, we would tax some retirement income, we would make our income tax progressive. A couple of quick things we could do is decouple from bonus depreciation at the federal level and maybe use a more realistic forecast of revenue so we don't have to make too many cuts. Final thing is on the expansion of the sales tax base to include services. This is the change in the relative importance in our economy of the sale of products, which we do tax with our sales tax, versus the sale of services, which we don't. So, bless you. The sale of products was 32%, this kind of sickly maroon-colored line, back in 1965. It was 32% of all economic activity in Illinois, whereas the sale of services was 36%. Since that time, the sale of goods, what we do tax, has fallen down to here. What we don't tax is that. Any wonder why we have a structural deficit? We don't tax the modern economy. What we do can't work. That is not ideological, that's math. That is math, and if we don't fix
I heard
it,
that before.
we're in trouble. Yeah, you heard it recently, I said it before. Will we become Taxachusetts if we do this? No. All of our neighboring states already tax services far more than us. So of the services we think you should tax, and we don't think you should tax business-to-business services, we don't think you should tax, well, I do think you should tax professional services, just politically not possible to do. In fact, there's some of my peer lawyers I would like to tax out of existence, but that's another story. We should really tax consumer spending. So things like haircuts and bowling and lawn care and all that stuff. Of the services CTDA suggests that the state tax, already, depending on the state, Indiana, Missouri, and Kentucky tax somewhere between 25 and 55% of them. Iowa and Wisconsin tax all of them. And I know you know that they've been taxing haircuts in Iowa and Wisconsin since the late 70s and early 80s. And there have not been busloads of people from Iowa and Wisconsin coming here to get a haircut. Now, if you've seen their haircuts, they should start coming. But they are not doing it.
Ralph, why don't you end on that? You can't top that line. How about a
So
Ralph?
I will end on that.
Can't stand the guy that just talks in adjectives and adverbs, doesn't have any numbers to back up what he's saying. Well, I'm sure, Senator Murphy, you agree with 95% of that. I'll let you respond first, and then Heather could come in and be the decider. Remember, it's not economic, it's just math.
Or who used the phrase fuzzy math?
That's the guy that won for president.
Bipartisan line. Here's the thing. The notion that Illinois is a low-tax state and that people in this state are undertaxed is essentially put forth by Ralph's group only. I love Ralph. He's a compelling speaker. He's as passionate about ideas as I am. But there isn't another group out there that doesn't rank Illinois in the bottom half of states in terms of overall tax burden. I'm sure he can explain how his group is different in that regard, but very few, actually only his as far as I know, rank Illinois as a low tax state. Most have us in the upper half in terms of overall tax burden. I scribbled notes as I was listening. It's a frenetic pace, as I know you know. So I want to try and piece this all together. Remember, too, the idea that somehow we underspent over the last decade, and that's why we have suffered economically. Taxpayers of Illinois over the last 5 years have sent more money to Illinois government than any 5 years in the history of the state. The top 5 revenue years for Illinois government are the last 5. And we're going to blow those 5 out of the water this year. So the idea that we haven't had enough tax revenue, that people haven't paid enough, is simply not supported by the numbers. Similarly, I noted the exclusion of the pensions. And again, I made reference before to the idea that you can't cut pensions out of the analysis on what you're spending because it's part of what you're spending. If I want to find this point because it was pertinent. We ramped up spending because of the pension payment ramp, is what was asserted. If that's the case, and we're pouring all of this additional money, all the money is going into the pension system, then why did we go from a $20 billion shortfall in '94 to about $85 billion today if all of this money we're funneling in went to the pension system? That's my point. If we are putting, the point is, if we're taking all of this money and we're starving other areas because of this funding ramp, shouldn't we have a much better funded pension system today than we do? But certainly if we ramped up spending on pension payment
Boy, the
over the
moderator
last
shows
15
in
years,
control, isn't he?
if we ramped up spending, as Ralph indicated, over the last 15 years, to keep up with this ramp.
Let him make his statement. Hold on. Let him make his statement, then we'll have questions. Make your statement. Don't ask him.
If we ramped up spending, as Ralph submitted, because of this pension ramp, all the money's going there, is what he's saying. Why are we looking at a pension drop from 20 billion in the hole to 85
All right,
billion?
hold on. You said that. Move on. We'll have questions. Let him finish. This is a university where we have decorum.
There's reference by both of the speakers to head count. And we are a lower head count state over the last number of years. There's no question about that. We also outsource a lot more people. So the actual reduction in spending, the impression that's created is somehow we're spending significantly less money on head count. We're spending somewhat less, but not corresponding to a 72 to 55,000 drop because we're outsourcing a lot of that and spending a lot of the money that way. Education funding was touched on. When you combine local property tax, state income tax, and federal money spent on K through 12 education in Illinois over the last 17 years, we have increased it from $11 billion to $28.4 billion, which is about $1 billion a year. We've seen test scores over that period through K through 12 flatline. That's well above the rate of inflation. And, the question becomes, what sort of return on that investment are we getting? At the university level, how much time and energy and cost is being directed at remedial efforts for those coming out of the high school system? So the idea that somehow we have shorted education K through 12 funding over the last 17 years, I don't think is borne out by the numbers. Oddly enough, one of the two areas that I do think have been shorted, in addition to human services, primarily by the Blagojevich administration, was higher ed, particularly community college. I'll just conclude it with this. As I indicated on the front end, if you want a sustaining model to pay the bills, you need to have people working here. You need to have a jobs climate here that's attractive. We have tried the Keynesian pump priming over the last decade that Ralph has just prescribed, and the result isn't there. We've put the tax increase in place that Ralph has asked for over that period of time, and despite having our unemployment rate drop throughout 2010, it has shot back up in 2011. Now, maybe some will consider that a coincidence, but I'm not quite sure it is. The best way forward to be able to pay for our bills, keep our promises, which is what all of us up here want to do, is to have a vibrant, growing economy that takes advantage of the assets that are unique to Illinois. I think we've been hamstringing ourselves with the policies in the past, and we need to go in a fundamentally different direction going forward if we're going to create that opportunity for the people here, and if we're going to be able to have a viable, growing economy that can fund our government. So thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate it.
Heather will have a very short rebuttal, and then if you have those little white cards, fill out your questions. I have a hunch that if we had questions from the audience, you would take as long as the speakers, so therefore put them on the card. This does limit the amount of verbosity. Remember, brevity and clarity are wonderful things. So there we go. There's some late returns coming in.
And I will make this quick because I do think we all want to get to the questions. Just, I don't know about you, sometimes I feel like I'm in a fog after something like this. You can hear very persuasive arguments about we should be cutting our taxes to grow the economy, to then the next person, well, we really need to spend more to really grow the economy, and our tax structure hasn't been supporting us correctly. It can get very hazy. A couple things I just want to note. Right now in the country, the top 400 wealthiest people control as much wealth as 150 million Americans. It is a much more stratified situation than we've ever had, ever in the history of the United States. And this, I do think, is very concerning. One of the things that I would find common ground on between Ralph and my colleague Matt, who I also have very high regard for, is that our tax structure probably does need working on. I think we can agree on that. It is not effective right now. I think it's highly regressive, but I wouldn't say it is overall too high. I just don't think it's properly functioning. And I do think we need some fundamental reform to it. One of the problems we have right now is we can't make it a progressive tax. For the United States, obviously, depending on what your income is, you can pay higher in your tax rate. By Illinois Constitution, it's a flat tax rate. So then that itself prevents us from making a progressive income tax. And then, sales tax that we have here has been very regressive as well. I think we can be doing things to make it a lot more fairer tax structure, and we should be doing that without necessarily increasing tax rates. I think we can make it a lot more fair and bring additional revenue in to help address some of these issues. The other thing I think we all agree on is, and you've seen it here, from the variety of perspective you come from, is there is undoubtedly a problem in maintaining the solvency of our pension systems. We didn't talk about that today, we did make some real fundamental reforms to the pension systems a while ago, where employees that are hired by the state and other governmental units too, as of January of this year, do go to a different tier of pension benefits. So we now have the highest retirement age in the country for new employees of any state in the country, at up to 67. We reduced the, limited what the annual increases in their benefits can be, and those sorts of things. So we've done that for unhired. Obviously, you get into serious constitutional issues whether you try to change anything for the current. It's probably something you want to get into. There's going to be a variety of views here, I think, on how you approach those kinds of things. But the reality is, we are going to have to keep increasing the amount we pay for our pension systems to sustain them over time, and that's going to crowd out other services. And those services are, as Ralph appropriately knows, as did I, education, healthcare, and other human services. And how much of that can we be cutting to continue to try to maintain these pension systems? Even if we have all the taxes going towards that, at some point, it's not manageable. So there's a serious issue here we're going to have to try to contend with. what I really want to close note on, what I think, again, that we can all agree on is the Simpson-like atmosphere in Illinois has really just got to end. I mean, we've had Republican, Democratic governors in jail. This is not the way other states are operated. And you guys, the voters, can't abide it. There is not enough attention and focus on who we are electing or enough accountability. I really believe that's where people have got to get more reform-minded folks in these offices who are really going to be accountable to their constituencies. It is not appropriate that we are, in a situation where we continue to have our leaders end up in jail. I think we have a governor now who's got a good heart. I don't think he's going to. But that all said, clearly there's issues going on that this has been an ongoing problem over a long period of time. So there's many groups out there that are trying to work at some of those fundamental issues too. I think everyone, even though it's hard to keep the focus on that because the pocketbook issues are always much clearer and dearer to our hearts, that is something that I think folks need to stay vigilant on if we really want to try to change the fundamental issues that I think we all agree on has got to stop. And I do believe we're getting more fiscally responsible in some of these things. It was a lot of gimmicks that got us here, and a lot of those have stopped, have not stopped enough. Ralph talked and Matt talked about us deferring payments into the future like they are for Medicaid. Well, the Medicaid reform bill that we passed does stop that practice, but it phases out over time, so we're still doing it this year. I don't think we should, personally. It was not in the budget that the Senate Democrats proposed. Unfortunately, it is in the final budget that passed. I don't abide it. That was done by the House on a bipartisan basis, Republicans and Democrats. I think it's wrong. Those are the kind of practices, but they are phasing out. We are getting rid of them. I think we're being a lot more responsible and more transparent in how we are funding government. We are just in a bind right now, and it's very critical that we solve the pension debt, because that's not going to go away and is going to crowd out spending.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, now a lot of these questions, of course, deal with, shockingly, with pensions, and I know it's a shocker. And a lot of the stuff that's been set up here has not dealt with pension. Cowards die many times before their death, but valiant face death but once. Looking at this crowd, no one's knitting. That's good. Okay, remember, I'm just a friendly moderator, but around half these questions deal with, well, let me just read one of them, but they're all basically the same, dealing with the fact, Barbara French, where are you, Barbara?
Right here.
Okay, right in the front. I could see that. We'll skip a couple of your questions, but get to the one that probably is on the minds of most of you. Even though you attacked the Mother Tribune, but that's okay. The Tribune has done a great job of demonizing people like me. My only crime was working faithfully for 30 plus years. Do the legislatures have any idea about what the average person gets? What ideas do you have for bringing in more revenue? That question is pretty much what a lot of you are saying. How are these pensions going to be continued? And notice no one talked about whether we should change the rules on pensions, like taxing health, we mentioned that, or shall we say ending the cost of living increase, annual cost of living increase. These are really big issues, but let's just deal with this one. 30 years, put your money in the pension, right?
Every 2 weeks without fail, whether I wanted it to or not.
You never vote.
Nope.
Too bad.
Couldn't take a pension holiday.
Any response to Barbara? Okay, moving on. Okay, Ralph, go ahead.
I think we should tax some retirement income. I had some numbers in there. This isn't on. I think we need to tax some retirement income, especially for more affluent seniors. There's by the year 2040, about 23-24% of our state's population is going to be retired. You just can't have that growing demographic have all their income untaxed. And for instance, if you said your retirement income is taxable at over $50,000, you'd only get 18% of retirees. At over $100,000, you'd only get 3.8% of retirees. So that's one thing that you do. Have to expand the sales tax base to include consumer services. We've got to do that, and we will never solve our fiscal problems. They will never, ever, ever go away. I think that Senator Stain's comments about the progressive income tax make a ton of sense. There's ways you can work within the existing system to target tax relief for low and middle income families, but really the best policy initiative is progressive rate structure. And then finally, that pension ramp needs to go out the window, and one of two things has to happen. You either re-amortize it over a longer period of time, flatten out the pension payments, and treat it like a real mortgage loan, and get it at a payable level, so that over time, after inflation, the payment is a decreasing fiscal strain rather than an ever-increasing one. That's one thing to do. Another potential change in the payment structure is to say, okay, let's keep our happy unfunded liability right where it is and not grow it at all. So every year we pay our full normal cost into the system plus all interest on the debt. And if you did that, even though it's a $80 billion or after the market performance, maybe it's in the high 70s now, unfunded liability today, and that only leaves us 38% funded. In 20 years, we'd be like 60, 65% funded, et cetera, because you wouldn't be growing the unfunded liability over time. So there are a couple of things that need to be done. They all require a very rational discussion and the willingness to finally adjust the tax structure to reflect the modern economy.
Any other quick comment? Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I'll jump on this one. I think, more broadly, it is, it's an extremely difficult situation, and one where when I talk to, people who will have a pension or are earning one, and I hear this particularly in my area from teachers, there is an increasing sense of the sort of under siege mentality that you started your comment with, that I try to avoid as much as possible contributing to, because we need good people to teach. We need good people to teach at all levels. We need good people to want to go into this. These are important jobs. They're not easy jobs. We want good people to do them. So, we can take some of that, I think, off the table, or should, in the discussion. We are at 38% funded in a very difficult situation. TRS right now, the average pension is about $41,000. That's going to go up because the people that retire now make more money. So over time, what TRS is going to have to pay out is going to go up. So I don't know if we can just, pay the interest on the shortfall now and have this remain sustainable. When I look at this going forward, and there's every opportunity to ascribe blame for how we got here. You have people who, and I've never voted for a budget that shorted the pension. We voted, and Heather was a leader on this year, to make the pension payment in cash, which I think was the right thing to do, and I supported that. The reality of the situation is we are where we are, regardless of whose fault it is. And when I look at a situation of a 38% funding level, I don't feel a height, and when you look at how much of our budget is going to it, and Heather touched on this, it was 3% of the budget in '95. It is, between the pension payment and and paying back the borrowing for previous pension payments, you're up closer to 20% now, which is consistent with that ramp that I was talking about before. But going forward, they're talking about this becoming close to 50% of the three taxes that primarily fund state government. I don't see that as viable. I mean, if we're breaking our arms, patting ourselves on the back for making the full pension payment this year in cash when it's less than 20, as it becomes a larger percentage, I don't see that happening. I really don't. And, so when I look at this, I don't think, my biggest fear going forward for people that have had a promise made to them is that you keep as much of it as you can realistically keep. And to me, looking at the percentage that it's funded and the likelihood that it's going to be paid out going forward, I don't feel confident that the full pension payment is going to be, the full promise is going to be kept for every current employee, particularly younger ones. So, those who are closer to retirement, and certainly those in retirement, I don't worry about that as much. But my worst case scenario is somebody who relied on this throughout their entire career, getting to the age of 75, and because we blindly just went through and ignored this problem, and when they get to 75 and are beyond a point in their life where they have the ability to really do anything about it, they get an IOU instead of a pension check. And I don't think by ducking this issue today, I did that person any favor, because I told them the sweet lie that they wanted to hear. I think we need to reform pensions for current employees to keep as much of the promise to those in the system now as we can. Whatever that looks like, you know, I'm open to discussion, but I'm not confident that the money is there to keep the full promise that's been made.
Okay, now, some of you thought that Speaker Madigan has an easy job, or Senator President Cullerton has an easy job. Brief remarks of oxymoron in Springfield. Brief remark. Well, by the way, those of you who know me, I hope you appreciate that I am absolutely keeping under control all my comments. I could unload it. I could unload it any time. Be careful. Be careful. Now, again, no disrespect to the questions, but a lot of them were like Barbara's questions, so there. But here's one from John McCroskey. Where are you, John? All right, John. Will a drop in the unemployment rate to
Approximately.
to 4%?
Approximately 4%.
John, you watch too many Frank Capra movies. Okay. Will a drop in the unemployment rate to 4% solve the state's fiscal crisis?
I want a perspective.
Yeah. In other words, Ralph, it wouldn't.
No, and the other problem with the state,
Use the mic, Ralph.
the other problem with the state's economy is, at least since 1980, the vast majority of new jobs being created are in the low-paying, low-to-no benefit service sector. So, to give you some data, in 1990, manufacturing was our #1 employer in the state, and low-wage service was 4 or 5. They flipped now. So by 2007, low-wage service was the #1 employer in the state, and manufacturing had dropped to 4 or 5. And this low-wage service sector pays on average about 30% less, and it certainly provides significantly fewer benefits. And I think the scarier thing is, if you just look at even the 1990 to 2000 or the 1990 to 2007 sequence, if you take the low-wage service sector out of the Illinois economy over either of those sequences, we're a net job loser. So for a long time, structurally, we haven't been very competitive from a job creation standpoint. And to get to our low tax status, I mean, if you don't want to trust the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability's peer-reviewed numbers on that, you can go to something called the Federation of Tax Administrators. It is just what it sounds. It's at the federal level. They just collect the audited financial reports of the state and run the data. According to them, we rank 46th in total state and local tax burden as a percentage of income before our tax increase. After our tax increase, because they don't have CAFRs for all the states to update, we took our tax increase and imposed it on the last year they had. We would have moved up from 46 to 38. 5th largest population, 5th largest economy. So we've been very low tax, at least according to the Independent Federation of Tax Administrators, who does nothing but report audited financial data for decades, and it hasn't helped us. And I think one of the reasons we're losing high-paying, good benefit jobs is we don't invest adequately in education. We did grow our investment. Your numbers are exactly right. But the problem is we didn't have a metric to evaluate the growth by. So if 10 years ago it would cost your workers $1,000 to build a car and you're giving them $100, you couldn't build much of a car. And if over 10 years you increased your funding 700%, now they have $700, you still can't build a car. You got to know what it costs to provide an adequate education. And the differential I gave you was the amount between what we do put in per kid for education and the cost of an adequate education. So we've never gotten there, despite the fact that there has been effort made to increase education funding, and particularly at the local level, not so much at the state.
Go ahead, Heather. Jump right in.
The question makes me just think about one of my pet peeves in all of this, and this whole conversation does, is that there's not a very good source for independent economic analysis for us as policymakers. So I've been taking a look right now, working with the Legislative Research Unit and here in Illinois, as well as the Pew Charitable Trust, which does a lot of economic analysis statewide, and how we might try to create something in Illinois to do that. Because I think on our big issues, we really need independent suggestions on what are the real ramifications for big policy changes we might be proposing, and or to help give us proactively suggestions on things to help deal with kinds of these big ticket issues like our pension system. So I am taking a look at that. Just want you to know, I think this sort of illuminates how problematic this can be.
Thank you.
We have a, right along those lines, this is anonymous. Normally I don't go anonymous, but since it's a place of higher education where morality and ethics is always at the highest level, I will do this. I've been in higher education for many decades, so I say that with sincerity. The budget should be balanced and available for public viewing so that all know where the money goes. How can this be fixed? Mind you, if you listen closely, a lot of numbers are being thrown here. And sometimes they don't match up, do they?
No.
Hard for me to believe that I can't be heard. Sometimes the numbers don't match up. Whereupon, as Ralph Martiri's heard this many times, the people in Springfield who do these numbers, many of them graduated from the University of Houdini because they're magicians. And somehow they're not playing with the same set of books. Because you could have numbers, what percent of it, the big four, is it 82% or is it 91%? Who's doing the counting? Obviously, my idea never worked. I wanted the Board of Election Commissioners in Chicago to do the counting because that would be a fair and accurate total. All right. Can we have a budget that should, I'll repeat the question. The budget should be balanced and available for public viewing. Quick answer, is it?
Well,
Quick answer.
there is now a 3-year budget proposal the governor has to put online. That's new. It is online at illinois.gov. It's a very high-level summary. It's like a 1-page, but it has to show for 3-year projections as well. That is something that we're working on doing a lot. And also, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget does put out very detailed budget books that do give all that information. The problem is it's pages long and can be hard to understand.
All right, good answer. Good answer. Good answer.
But it is not balanced.
Better answer. Better answer.
I didn't say it was.
They asked 2 questions.
Yeah, that's a
Should it
separate.
be transparent? Yes. Is it balanced? No.
Viewing so that we know where the money goes.
We get them all from the Commission on Government Forecasting and Analysis.
Right.
The state data either comes from Commission on Government
Reed, go into
Forecasting
the microphone,
Analysis
Mr.
or
Martiri.
We get our data either on the state numbers, either from the Commission on Government Forecasting Analysis, the Governor's Office of Management and the Budget, or the Comptroller's Office. The Comptroller's Office is always the best place to go because those are final numbers. Those are the actual numbers used. The problem is it's a year or 2 old, so it doesn't give you an analysis of the current budget and the appropriations for there. You have to look at the revenue projections and the spending recommendations that are actually in the final budget that passed. And COGFA, the Commission on Government Forecasting and Analysis, a bipartisan organization, does its own projections and stuff. And so that's where we get our state numbers from. Our national numbers are all from census or BEA.
So we don't have policy figures and you have to get them from someplace.
No, they make them public. I mean, and I think Senator Staines was right when she said the governor now has the obligation to post this online. It's just if you look at the whole budget, it's not the most transparent document to wade through.
Leave it at this. Just because the numbers are there doesn't mean it's understandable. And we'll leave it at that. And for those of you getting a little uppity, think of a university budget. Enough said, right? Because we know all that money, we know is exactly where it's going, right? All time. So you can get away with this crap if you've been involved in this for 40 years. I mean, and I see some of my older colleagues, former colleagues, not older colleagues, who were with me at Governor State, where every single budget was absolutely pristine. Right, Former Provost Curtis? Absolutely correct. Okay, moving on. Before I get, that's one good thing about working for a private university. You avoid that Board of Higher Education. Quick anecdote. I went down there with that gentleman, and remember I started a fight with the guy who was overviewing us, and I said something to the effect, if you really were good at this, you'd have a job at a university. Just a way to win over people. Just a way to win them over. Last time I was ever invited to go down to do that, by the way. Okay, Andrew Crosby, where are you? Okay, right in the front. And by the way, excellent printing. Will you,
Penmanship, okay.
brevity and clarity, BC. I don't know who this is addressed to, but it's a good question. Will you, if I could speak, will you be releasing a written plan at some point to outline what will be done to restore Illinois' fiscal health? A written plan. Is anyone going to do that, or do we go to say the governor will put it out in the office of his office, and then some other office, and another office? Will there be a written plan how we'll do this?
We put out this year, and you can check it out at IllinoisRealityCheck.com.
Who's
the Senate Republican Caucus put out a plan for both the budget and sort of a jobs plan going forward. Two components on there that you're certainly welcome to check out.
Good.
Yeah, we have that Funding Our Future report, which has a whole series of tables in the back where we analyzed all the major proposals that were put on the table and projected them going forward. And that's the report, one of the key reports I was talking about, that has been peer reviewed by the Institute of Government and Public Affairs, the Government Accounting Office in DC, and about 4 or 5 other PhD economists at universities across the country from both sides of the aisle politically. So the numbers in there have been vetted. There is no complex modeling. We just try to do simple math, because once you have a model has assumptions, and the assumptions tend to dictate the outcomes. And so instead of relying on modeling, we literally, like for a tax burden calculation, we look at final total state and local revenue from all sources, taxes and fees, and divide that amount by state income to get the percentage of income. And the state income numbers come from straight from census. So we just do math. We don't do modeling.
Okay, there is no one source that simply says, you know, all these fancy names, truth. Just one source. So you go, it's like watching MSNBC or Fox. Pick your choice. Okay, Chad Turner, where are you? Right there, Chad. Very good question. Murphy, get ready to jump. You're going to like this one. Regulations are one of the biggest barriers for current business owners. What is being done to minimize and reduce regulations in Illinois?
I think the short answer is probably not enough. I mean, I'll share an anecdote briefly. I was speaking with, regardless of what you think of ethanol and ethanol production, it's sort of a separate analysis in this, but I was speaking with a guy from a major producer of it, and he said, great corn state, you guys should be, you used to be number 1 in ethanol production, and now you're on your way to about number 5, and they're building ethanol plants right across the Mississippi in Iowa and Missouri like crazy, because they still want access to your corn cheaply, but they aren't building them in Illinois. And I said, well, how much is a plant in private investment? He said, probably $250 million to build. And I said, how many could we get if we were really aggressive on it? He said, you could at least have a dozen of them. So you're talking several $1 billion of private investment in areas of the state that could really use it. I said, well, why aren't we getting it? He said it takes 6 months to hear back for permitting in Illinois, and it takes a matter of weeks in Iowa and Missouri. This is probably a more minor point, but a bit of a poke in the eye. The permit over there is a couple $1,000, and over here it's $38,000. And if you're going to spend $250 million, the 36 grand is probably not determinative. But again, why not try and entice them here? And I don't know that Iowa is known for slipshod environmental standards, so I suspect that's not it. I think it's probably more of a competency thing. But I mean, that type of attitude and approach permeates, and I think it gets in the way. And to the extent that we can be more aggressive on trying to get businesses up and running here, we can get more of the people here working. To the extent from a regulatory, and there's a role for a regulatory process. I don't mean that. It's always a check and balance, though. And are we being as accommodating to the job creators we want to entice here through our regulatory process? Everything we've heard thus far is no.
Yeah, it's even worse actually for larger energy facilities. So in Iowa, the permitting process for larger energy facilities is about 4 months. In Illinois, it's up to 2 years. So our permitting process is really messed up. We serve on an economic development task force with a bunch of downstate, the Farm Bureau and a bunch of others that looked at these things. And clearly the way we go about interfacing with business is backwards, it's slow, and it's inefficient. And so if your shovel time is delayed by months, so is the time when you've got your facility up and running and you can start making money. So that's a real detriment to economic growth, and I agree completely with Senator Murphy. It's something that needs cleaned up.
Yeah, I would agree. This is one that there's a lot of agreement on. I think what Mayor Emanuel is doing here in Chicago sets a good standard, that his charge to his heads of all of his agencies has been, I want to see these permits done in much shorter period of time, putting out those goals and trying to figure out how to get to them. I think we should be doing more of that. I do know at least we did have to do one set where we're decreasing the amount of time it does to do permitting in the Environmental Protection Agency, working with the Illinois Chamber of Commerce. So we did just pass one. A lot of work to do in this area. I just also wanted to note though, I used to work at the Civic Committee, which is a membership organization of CEOs, CEOs of the largest companies in Chicago before I became a legislator. They're one of the groups that have been, I don't agree with them entirely on what they're trying to do right now, entirely on pensions, so you probably hear from them a lot on that. But what I will say is, because I hear from them a lot, the things that the CEOs have said that have been the biggest concerns that they have in working in Illinois are, one, the fact that we feel like we are an out-of-control state, that we have not been reining in our budget. So the fact, and they would even all acknowledge, maybe not publicly, but would all acknowledge we needed a tax increase as part of the solution. Now they would like to have a different order, have us do some other things before we did the tax increase, I would suggest. But they knew that I think was part of what we need to do to really get our house in order. And we've been taking steps in doing that. And I think that's going to go a long way too to providing more stability and confidence in operating your businesses in Illinois. And another thing you hear a lot from businesses here that is workers' compensation. We have outrageously high workers' compensation costs. And we did just do a significant workers' compensation bill to reduce those costs. I'm not sure it went far enough. I think we're going to have to track it very carefully and see whether that really does end up solving the problem or not, or whether we need to be doing more. But we have been starting to tackle some of the big issues. And then the third thing the businesses always say that they care most about for their long-term growth is the quality of the education system. And Illinois, I would suggest, has been doing the most to advance the state of our education system of almost any other state with some of the legislation we passed, and it's not been costing us money doing so. We have just passed a fabulous bill that probably many of you know about that really makes sure that it's balanced approach to how we're evaluating performance and making that performance count, not just looking at test scores, but growth of students as a part of what we're considering. And in order for that to mean something, it has to have something connected to it. And that is now that when you're looking at your hiring and firing decisions, you can at least consider performance in that decision-making process. And I think this is one that we've done it in a very effective way too, where we had all the players at the table. It was an agreed-to bill. We did it with union support, which I think is another strong point in the way Illinois has been operating, unlike Wisconsin, where things have been getting very divisive.
Again, by the way, I think coming out of this, they all agree that either we need to start hiring more people in the permit department at the state of Illinois, or perhaps Mayor Emanuel needs to get a new job.
Let's go on.
Motion already?
Well, listen, after he clears up Chicago, I would love to see Rahm Emanuel in the Springfield taking on the Springfield Press. It would make the battle of the Little Bighorn come out even. Okay, moving on. That wasn't half bad. Okay, Senator Murphy, this is to you. This goes right to the heart of what you believe. This is from John, is it Hooper? Right. Well, we're all in front, too. Hopper, you can't duck. Senator Murphy, Ronald Reagan tripled the debt in 8 years from $997 billion to $2.9 trillion. I'll assume that's correct. Although federal revenue increased and the Reagan tax cuts, the debt increased threefold. Ronald Reagan started the mega deficit and mega debt. How can you say that by reducing taxes the country benefited? That's a kind of an even question.
Well, as I indicated, and as you actually acknowledged in your question, after cutting tax rates, revenue went up, and actually over the 8 years of the presidency actually doubled, which is a pretty substantial rate. The deficit was, in the increase in spending, was in part in response to the Soviet Union and an effort to put them on the ash bin of history, which I think was successful. There was a Congress involved in spending as well, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school by suggesting Tip O'Neill probably wasn't leading the charge on spending cuts during the 80s. More than that, though, I think it set off a 25, 27-year period of economic expansion and growth and personal success for people in this country, the likes of which the country has never seen. I think most people would look back on that era as among the most successful in not only American history, but world history, and I think Ronald Reagan had a significant amount to do with that success.
Okay. All right. Let's stay on topic. We don't want to refight the Cold War. All right. We're now at the end of near the end. So why don't we give in reverse order, starting with Mr. Marguerite, 3 minutes, and I'll be counting for the knockdowns at the bell. 3 minutes to summarize not only what you've said here today, but how you would put this into focus, dealing with the subject that most of these people are most concerned about. That's the pension. Realizing that people, and by the way, I'm all in favor of this, are living longer. I just want you to know I'm on record. I'm on record on that one. Living longer, staying obviously therefore longer on pension. The discussion about taxing, state income tax, the tax, increasing, for current employees, the payments for health. All those things are things that these folks are thinking about. And given all the stuff we discussed about the budget, how do you see this playing out in the next 2 to 5 years? And by the way, it's not a good answer with anybody in this room to say that will kick in 2045. I'm just going on for some of you might. I don't plan on being here in 2045. I don't know about you, but go ahead, Ralph. You got 3 minutes.
Well, we're not going to solve the problem by either continuing to snipe along ideological lines nor ignoring the hard, cold data that is unassailable, the stuff that comes from census and BEA and BLS, nor by repeating mistakes of the past. So I think to chart the path forward, you look at what sound tax policy is. The 4 principles are that it should be fair, responsive, stable, and efficient. We're 0 for 4. We mix and match our revenue sources so that we remain competitive overall on tax burden, but yet raise
enough recurring revenue to fund essential public services and redo the pension so that it is a payable obligation. As far as future pension payments to future workers, that can be adjusted. I just think eliminating things like COLAs that are really just COLAs, that cost of living increases, are negative for your economy long term. They really hurt the purchasing power of some really good consumers. Senior citizens are also great consumers. They see no reason to save a lot more. And if you have a negative COLA or no COLA at all, in reality purchasing power declines over time. So I think focusing on the actual cause of the problem, and in this case the actual cause of the problem from a structural standpoint is clearly tax policy, fixing it, modernizing it, making it more fair, more stable, more efficient, remain competitive overall, but actually paying our bills and making those investments in the public sector side that generate true long-term economic growth, like in pre-K through 12 education, like in higher education, and caring for the folks that are most vulnerable in our society.